All right, here we go.
And we're back for round 3 of this Sexpisodes, the third round and the final round. And today, Mary and I are just going to kind of just talk about our own personal experiences. So in the last 2 episodes, we were really heavy on the ideological side of things, but, we are where science and real life intersect, although this is more like where theology and real life intersect. So it's more
I'll take it.
kind of a mixture of everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just wanted to share kind of our own personal experiences, especially because a lot of what we were talking about was more of the extreme side of things. And we have had kind of our own personal experiences with purity culture, more, I would say, interactions when it came to contraceptive mentality. And so we just wanted to take time to talk about that because that has been part of what's informed, so much of what we've done. And now that I say that out loud, I'm like, maybe we should have opened with this.
Well, no, now everybody kind of understands. Like last time you said it was like educational, informative, and now it's how it's applicable in real life.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah. Because a lot of, like we've said, if you were born and raised in the United States, like you've been touched by purity culture. And actually, true to form, we're recording this on Wednesday of NFP week. True to form, contraceptive mentality folks came out on the social medias and said what they usually say. And it just, I started realizing, I was like, wow, contraceptive mentality is actually very similar to purity culture in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways. And I also remembered that I had made grandiose promises of talking about what Jansenism was and what that has to do with all of this, and I never did. So maybe at some point in this episode I should touch on that. If not, if we do fail to cover it, I will include some resources we'll include some resources in the show notes.
And since you brought it up about seeing a lot of stuff on social media, I think it's worth pointing out that like the stuff that I have seen seems to invoke fear. And I think that's worth just pointing out. Like, yes, living our Catholic faith is hard. It's certainly not always easy, but it shouldn't be pushed in the sense of like fearfulness. We shouldn't be living out our lives in fear.
Right.
Like Emily has explained, if you follow her Total Wine page, there's documents, the church teachings are out there. They're plain, like you can read them yourselves and let the Holy Spirit lead you. And it's just, we shouldn't be having this conversation, based on fear. There's no room for that in our faith. So I just want to point that out.
Jesus was pretty explicit, saying multiple times, do not be afraid.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think it's interesting to bring that up because again, that's another crossover that I see with purity culture is that human bodies and human sexuality is approached from a place of fear and shame. And, again, that's a product of the fall. That's not how it was from the beginning. And yeah, it just, anyway. All right. So let's, I don't want to make this, we're going to make this
another educational episode.
I know.
We could go on for days.
Personal stories. We are dishing the dirt today.
Yeah. Well, you start us off, Emily. Tell us about your very interesting story that I just learned for the first time a few days ago.
I know. As we were planning these episodes, I told Mary, I was like, I have a secret. It's not really a secret, but it's just not something that I ever thought I would. I don't know. It was just funny. But one of the things with purity culture that we kind of talked about, I think we talked about, it's only been a week since we recorded that episode and I've already forgot what we said, although it already has almost 100 listens and we just posted it yesterday.
Yeah.
Sexpisodes, it's clickbait. I knew it would work. Yeah. Anyway, I So I grew up in South Louisiana, which is largely Catholic, especially culturally. But my mom did some work for kind of with and then tangentially with people who are definitely evangelical. And purity culture is very strong with the evangelical faith movement. And I remember I was a freshman in high school, I think, and they were hosting a purity ball. Now, for those of you who don't know what a purity ball is, it's as terrifying as it sounds. Well, not as terrifying as it sounds, at least not for me.
Uncomfortable as it sounds.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There we go. It can get terrifying. I've heard versions like that, again, everything that we've talked about, there's a spectrum of the experience here, and I was definitely on like the less terrifying end. But essentially what a purity ball is, it's fathers take their daughters, and the whole point of this is for daughters to entrust their virginity and purity to their fathers for him to protect until they get married.
Which, if your face just made like a sound, yeah, yes, that's accurate.
It's yes, your whatever your face is, that whatever grimace you just donned is appropriate. And I don't, in my parents' defense, I don't think they fully understood exactly
what it was.
I know my dad was kind of weird about it, because my dad, it totally did not jive with my broader experience of my relationship with my dad.
Yeah, I wasn't grimacing at your parents. I was just the idea,
you know? The idea.
Yeah.
And I just feel the need to defend my parents for a second. Yeah. Anyway.
I understand.
But no, like, just for context, this was like, looking back, this was very out of character. Because my dad, he was like, look, he told me, he's like, I just figured you're going to leave my home one day. I just need to raise you to have your own BS meter, so that when you go out and you meet guys, you can deal with them. That was my dad's approach. So anybody who's familiar with a purity ball hears that and is like, well, what the heck were you doing at a purity ball? It was the consolation prize for me that year, because my parents wouldn't let me go to homecoming. Yeah. So anyway, can't have a date? Well, you can go on a date with dad. Anyway,
not really the same excitement that going to like a school dance brings.
Not quite.
But okay.
Not quite. Yeah, sort of missed the mark. But the purity ball that I went to, I've heard that with purity balls, sometimes what'll happen is like there's literally like a contract type of thing that girls will sign, that they give to their dad, that they will not have sex until they're married. Fathers will give their daughters purity rings as part of this ceremony thing.
Which is just not a promise you're making with your father. It's just right. Like, it's not.
Right. It's not. No. And like I said, my dad had the right approach. He was like, my job is to equip you to go out in the world and be confident and secure and, deal with whatever comes your way. And I 100% have your back if you need it, but you're going to be going out in the world and that's your job. So anyway, it was now that I'm like talking this out, I'm like, geez, yeah, what the heck were we doing anyway? But what we did as part of the ceremony was there was like this big, huge, like wooden cross at the front of the conference room. I don't even think it was a ballroom. It was like a conference room. And all the girls got white roses. And then we went and laid them, like our dads escorted us up to the cross, and then we laid the white rose down at the foot of the cross. So at least it was like the connotation of I'm entrusting my purity to Jesus, and my dad is there with me as part of this. It wasn't like giving it straight to my dad. but yes, still very creepy, still very
Yeah.
weird, still very what, excuse me. Um
I mean,
yeah,
our fathers do typically walk us down the aisle, and they're, when we get
right.
married, and there's that nice symbolism of,
Which is actually
giving you
Protestant. It's not
over.
Catholic.
Oh, see, shows how much I know.
Yeah. No, I found this out. So we actually had some friends of ours, quick tangent, who got married. And they both like husband and wife, fiancés, like the Catholic tradition is you both walk in down the aisle together, not holding hands, because it's a sign that you are entering into your marriage of your own free will, which is, like if you are not receiving the sacrament out of your own free will, it's not a valid sacrament. And so the fathers walking daughters down the aisle is this vestige of you actually like had arranged marriages and you kind of had to force your daughter into the marriage, right? That type of thing. So it's actually a very Protestant idea.
I had no idea. Well, it also reminds me of that extreme story you gave in the purity culture episode, where like the father, they like groomed her to marry her off with the father-in-law, and that thing. Not to say that that's happening all the time, but that's just what it reminded me of.
Right. Now, it's not to say like my dad walked me down the aisle.
Yeah,
and
mine did too.
Yeah. And I knew like I'm his only daughter. My dad and I have a very close relationship. And it's like, for all of you Catholics here, are like, oh my gosh, did I sin by letting my dad walk me down the aisle?
No.
Please calm down. I know somebody is thinking that. No. You just like the Catholic Church understands that this is like a cultural
It's
thing.
like it could be a sweet thing. It's fine.
Right. And so it's like it's not that big of a deal. But traditionally in Catholic weddings, husband and wife, like they would enter the church as fiancés, not touching.
I have never heard of. I had no idea. No idea.
I know. I had never heard of it until we saw our friends do it, and I was like, "Whoa, what the heck?" They were like walking in, and they're like, "Yeah, no, this is actually like how."
You're like, you did something wrong. They're like, no, we did something traditional.
I was like, does somebody really hate her dad? Anyway, yeah. So I thought that's just an interesting thing to note. But yeah. Anyway, so we did the purity ball, but that's like the only thing I remember really from the purity ball. I think we danced a little bit and there was like dinner and that type of stuff. No booze, of course. Of course I was a freshman in high school.
And so also I want to make sure we mention like father-daughter dances are fine. This is not saying anything against like a fun night that's special for like a father and his daughter to treasure. They slow dance. Like this is something different. This is
something very different.
Very different than that.
There is an agenda. It's not just fathers and daughters spending sweet quality time together. This has an agenda. And it's, it really robs, like, if you think about it, like on the, we can take it to the extreme. Like if my father is the custodian of my purity and my virginity, I have no control. I have no autonomy. I have no sense of my identity apart from what my dad gives me. Right. Which again, was not what happened in my case. Yeah. But if you look at what that sets up, the type of relationship that sets up, that's kind of what it tends towards.
I also can see, and not that this was not the case in your situation, but like almost kind of another situation where it's just that fear. Like I almost have this sense of like, if I were to leave that thinking like, okay, anytime I'm with a guy, like my dad is like, is he watching? Like, is he here? Like just that fear of like, I can't do this because my father was here with me. And like, I pledged my virginity to him. Like that is not ordered correctly. So I could see how that could cause a lot of confusion in a girl as she grows up.
Yeah, fear about what her dad's going to think, but also fear of not getting his approval about who she dates.
Yeah.
Because I knew people like young women who were like, in order for a guy to date her or to hold her hand or to give her a kiss, she wanted the guy to go to her dad for permission. And I'm just like,
to kiss her?
Like any
hold her hand,
contact or dating or anything, like dad needed to give permission.
You don't ultimately want your saving sex for marriage to have any thing to do with your father. You want to do it because it's the loving thing to do for yourself and your spouse. So it just makes it confusing, I think.
Well, it also just kind of makes it a little more like the three become one flesh, not the two, which is just awkward.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would say so.
You know, I know polyamory is a thing now, but let's not make it incestuous. Anyway, yeah, so that was one of my kind of like pinnacle moments. But yeah, just like even in more subtle ways, like I was certainly affected by the whole women's bodies are bad type of mentality. Like you need to cover your body. Like there was just this up until recently, and I really started to kind of parcel this out. I realized just how obsessed I was. Not like, or just, I wouldn't allow myself to even think about buying a certain item of clothing because, oh my gosh, that's going to show this part. And what does that mean? And it's just, I don't know. I thought about it. I was just like, again, it's fear-based. There was no freedom. It was just, I am approaching my body as something that is bad, something that needs to be covered. But also it was like kind of self-obsessive. You know, it was like, oh my gosh, like everybody, if I go out wearing this, everybody is going to be staring at my boobs. That's
like a
all anybody is going to notice.
Like a preoccupation with your body parts? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. It created this like this fear that if I went out wearing certain things, that, oh my gosh, this is all people are going to notice. This is all they're going to see. And I can't wear this because, you know, I don't want, you know, I want people to look at my face. I want people to see this whole, and I really started kind of unpacking and, again, to use the buzzword, deconstructing. Can I say that without people immediately wanting to gag and or having some kind of reaction? I don't know. I know it's kind of a buzzword right now, but just, you know, really thinking about my body in authentic terms. And, you know, I started reading Theology of the Body and this idea, you know, and again, kind of what we were talking about in the very first episode that we did for this mini series, that the body was good, that originally the body was made and it communicates who we are, right, to a very large degree. And so having this sense of my body is bad is like, well, I'm hating something beautiful, something good that God made, right? And so there's, you know, we feel that as like a tension and as a war, and I think that's why there's such a huge kickback against that right now. And again, like it does come out as a pendulum swing. Mm-hmm. You know, some people can be like, well, I'm going to wear as little clothing as possible. And like, you still have to give me respect. And I think this is where, you know, the both and has to come in. It's like, we all need to have both a sense of our own dignity and also a respect for the dignity of others. And yes, it's absolutely reflected in how we dress and how we talk. Everybody's thinking the M word right now, modesty. I'm not going to talk about that word. I can't stand that word. Anyway, I've gotten to the point where it's just like the word itself is like,
what does it even mean anymore? Yeah, it's like you hear it so many times.
I know. I don't know. It's so used and abused, and nobody really understands what it means. I think it really is just like that you wear, you know, the prairie dresses that were big at Target recently. Like why? I don't know. But did you see that trend?
Well, I feel like I see the prairie type dresses a lot.
Yeah,
so I don't...
yeah, they're big right now. And apparently, you know, I mean, like that's if we
well, they can be really cute. I mean,
they can be cute, but when that is like, you know, this is the only way to dress if you're a woman, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah,
right.
No, like, thanks. Oh, you'll get me all day on that. Don't even.
I know. I will wear my shorts and I will show my shoulders in summer. Thank you very much.
And I will wear my skinny jeans and my high heels. Thank you very much.
I know. Sorry, Gen Z. We still wear skinny jeans.
Oh, is that not its style anymore? Okay, anyway.
People up.
But shows how much I know. But
now we are controversial.
We lose, I think, and I had a little bit similar to this in the sense that like we don't cover our bodies because they're bad, and that's the message that often gets communicated. We cover our parts of our bodies because they're so precious.
Right. And because we live in a fallen world, and
Mhm.
because we have lost that intrinsic respect for the dignity of the other person. And so there is this covering that, and I think part of me would like to think that the rebellion against that is because we know this was not what we were made for. Although, I don't know. I can't imagine just like walking around totally naked in the world, like just as a matter of just basic, like I'm thinking about sweating. I'm thinking about, I don't know. I'm just like, something needs to just kind of keep that stuff in place. I don't know. That's just me. Like, it's
Clothes
hard
are
for me.
practical. I mean, they protect your skin, they keep you from getting hot and
I
cold and
know.
sunburn. So yeah, clothes are
Right.
good.
But maybe like in a perfect world, it would just be 72 degrees all the time and we'd be fine. I don't know.
Yeah, I would love that.
Um, maybe
Give
that's
me
what
the
paradise,
72
but
degrees, please.
I don't know. Or maybe, I don't know. What would have happened if we hadn't have left Eden and we had like, I would imagine we would still have seasonal weather. Like, what would we do in the
Yeah, I think
wintertime?
seasons are good.
I know seasons are great. Like everything's cyclical and like I think that's just kind of the natural part of things. But like, yeah, what being naked in the snow? Like, I don't know.
No,
How would
thank
that
you.
work? Anyway, musings for another day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that that body shaming, that, yeah, it's so kind of, it's subtle. And that's what kind of makes it so insidious, is that until I didn't realize how obsessed I was with what I wore and how I looked and how self-critical I was of my body and all this type of stuff, until I, started talking about fertility awareness and started getting into this and trying to develop this love and appreciation for my body. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. We're not exactly on the greatest of terms, apparently. Like, whoa. And for me, like, especially now, I know a lot of women experience this. It's not entirely so much for physical, like, appearance reason, although I'm in my third trimester, so it's starting to be that. But with pregnancy is like this, your body is changing rapidly. And like I really started to have some big insecurities come up that were rooted in the stuff that I had before, and really started to notice and started to pay attention to them. And ironically, when I was reading Genesis of Gender by Abigail Favale, that's where I really started to kind of pull out and notice, because some of the stuff that she was describing, I was like, oh my gosh. She actually talks about her relationship with her postpartum body and the way that she described it. I was like, that's me during pregnancy. Anyway, but it just, this idea that your body, the woman's body is bad. That's our starting point with purity culture. And then everything that we do beyond that, the way we dress, the reasons why we dress the way we dress, and think about all of these different things, comes from that place of the body is bad. It's a temptation for men. And, we debunked that in the first episode, but it's there and it's insidious. And it's like, it absolutely has at times, not dramatically, but affected my relationship with my husband. Like I can feel like self-conscious, and then I don't feel as open with him,
Yeah.
and it can hit at different times. And the weird thing about it is, it doesn't matter that he reassures me that he finds me beautiful. It's not about how he sees me. It's about how I see myself. Yeah. And yeah, so
That's a very interesting thing to realize too,
yeah,
that it's about how you see yourself. That's why
yeah,
like it's great that he can reassure you, but it's also something
yeah,
that like you're always working on.
yeah,
And something else I've heard of too, like if that I think this could play out, is I know when women have really big breasts, and this can be just regular or just with pregnancy, you know, a lot of times if you don't wear a turtleneck, something might show. Like, I know it's hard for women to find tops that really cover them completely.
Yeah.
And that's not like, that's okay. Like, it's not intentional. It's not like, you don't have to wear turtlenecks all the time. That is
Right.
not you trying to expose yourself. That's just like, that is just the effect of your breasts have grown, and that's how God made you. And if there's a baby in your belly, like, this is how God made a woman's body to go.
Yeah.
Wait, we were joking the other, like a few weeks ago, about like images of the Blessed Mother when she's
Oh my
pregnant
gosh.
and how they're completely unrealistic and how
Yes, because
funny
I
it
pulled up,
was.
because this all was like, we were having this conversation because I am that woman who has larger breasts, who is very self-conscious about how she dresses for that reason. And I was thinking like, oh man, I'd love to, like, go to the Blessed Mother to kind of have a more holistic appreciation of the way my body is made. But in every single depiction, she is either flat chested, or there was this weird, and this was the article I sent you. There was this weird phase in the like Renaissance art decided to depict the Blessed Mother breastfeeding Jesus. And I swear, not a single artist had ever seen a breast before. Because the way that like, go look this up. We might have to include this article in the show notes. I don't know. We'll see. But it's absolutely hysterical. Like, they're not, like, the boobs are like not in the right place. They're like just like not a normal natural shape. It was just kind of like this very stylized, but yeah, who like, and I think the thing that I sent you, it was like 30 different images of the Blessed Mother breastfeeding Jesus. And yeah, none of them got the boobs
All
right.
different degrees of inaccurate. So just kind of all over the place. It was just like, what was this person thinking? But
I know.
I don't know why it's so hard, but it's just the way God made you is good, period. Like, whether you're pregnant or not, the way God made your body is good. End of story. So
yep, I know. It's like, and here was, I'll get really vulnerable with this. And this was something that I shared with you when we were talking about this, that when I was younger, I used to fantasize about the day that I would be done having kids so that I could go get a breast reduction.
yeah, that shows that like this was very much on your mind.
Yeah.
And not in a good, positive way. That, again, this is just how God made you. And it's nothing that you need to say you're sorry for. It's nothing that you have to feel bad about. But like, yeah, I think we have some work to do in that, especially as Catholics, as Christians, when we raise our daughters, to just teach them about the goodness of their body, no matter what it looks like.
Right. And it's, you can kind of think about this. Like, I think there's like kind of a good allegory here that we can teach both the goodness, the both and here, like the goodness of the body, and we live in a fallen world. And in a fallen world, here's what you do have to put some scraps of fabric, okay? But unless you're a nudist, God bless you. But I this just popped in my head thinking about the way that we think about nutrition. I follow a lot of nutritionists who specialize in like feeding toddlers and feeding little kids because they're notoriously picky and all this type of stuff. And one of these people that I've found, the way that she talks about food is excellent. Like, we were kind of raised like, oh, carbs are bad. And, diet culture kind of casts some foods as good and some foods as bad. And she's like, no, all food is good. However, different foods do different things in your body. And it's important to understand how these foods work so that you eat the right amount of them in the proper proportion. And I was like, bingo. So if we can have an approach like that to how we think about the way our body is made and the way we dress it and so forth, that is like, there's not really good or bad when it comes to clothes. It's what is right for you, because we have all these different body types. There's different cultures, right? There's different, there's a huge difference in the way that people dress between the United States and Brazil and China and Italy and, everything in between, right? And so having just kind of I don't know, just a more like, this is all good. However, it's good in different amounts, or I don't know. I haven't teased this out completely, but I just liked the way that she approached food. So like, for example, she's like, candy's not good or bad. It's just, it has sugar and it only does one thing in your body. And that's it. And when you know that, it's like, okay, so I can have some candy, but I shouldn't have too much, because too much sugar does X, Y, and Z. And I was like, this is just brilliant.
It takes a lot of the pressure off thinking of it like that. It just sounds very practical to me. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like there's not good food and bad food. It's all good food. It just all does different things. And I know the analogy, like when you talk about clothing, I think that it doesn't completely translate, but just kind of a much more holistic way of approaching this in general is better. And of course, it doesn't help. I don't know if I should bring this up, because this is really deep Catholic insider baseball. Like,
oh gosh,
deep.
I have no idea what you're gonna say.
So a lot of the pushback that you'll hear about clothing from the Catholic side of things, and this is where we do get very purity culture. Okay, let's just call it out for what it is. That Our Lady of Fatima during her apparitions said that there were fashions that were like offensive to our Lord. That's what she said. She didn't say there was no specifics about which ones.
So clearly she was talking about skinny jeans and shorts. I'm being sarcastic.
Exactly. Okay. So that's what's happened is that a lot of Catholics have taken that and said, oh, well, here's the fashions that she's talking about. And here's it's obvious. These are the fashions that she is talking about. And I'm like, she didn't specify. So I'm not going to put words in her mouth. I'm not going to doubt what she said, but also I'm not going to put words in her mouth. And they kind of, the mistake that they make is they say, well, look at how Mary dressed. And I'm like, Mary was a woman from the first century Middle East.
Look at how the Vikings dressed. They were Vikings.
Well, and she dressed as was appropriate for the time and the place from which she came.
Yeah.
And that's not appropriate for the time and place from which we come. And it's like, we don't dress as first century Middle Eastern women.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the way I look at it. Like I say this all the time, and I'm going to keep saying it all the time, because we're unique. We're all like, God has made only one of us. We have our own styles. We have our own body types, and that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. And like, I'm going to connect more to certain people, and a factor of that can be how they dress. Like, I'm just not going to be able to relate fully to people who, like, I don't know, not just dress a certain way. I'm not trying to minimize somebody to the way they dress, but just like, if we're really trying to reach the body of Christ, we need to have a lot of different personalities and styles, and like the way we talk and the words that we use and the music that we listen to. We have to have that variety. Like, it's not, this is how God made us, because we're supposed to reach out and connect with people who, of all kinds of people, that's the way I think of it. And it's just, if every Catholic dressed the same, like if every woman wore the same prairie dress, well, we're going to be missing out on a lot of people that need us.
Right.
Okay. So,
well, and it's also, it's a point where, and this goes back to the fall, but also like, I'm thinking of like Tower of Babel, right? That our differences become a point of division instead of unity. Right. Whereas before the fall, our differences were a point of view, like a point of unity. After the fall, they're a point of division. And it's like, no, Like we're all, yeah, like you said, we're all made different. And we could go off and be like, well, how boring would it be if we were all the same? Like, yeah, okay, that's been said. Let's go a little deeper though. Like, let's actually think about, think about those differences as a good thing. And instead of thinking about body types and clothing as this prescriptive, legalistic thing, how can it be individualized to our dignity, right? Still like expressive of who we are, which includes just our basic human dignity. So anyway, should we move on to did you have more stories about purity culture for you, or did I just drop the juicy bomb?
What juicy bomb? I'm confused.
Purity balls.
Purity balls. I certainly didn't have any purity balls. No. Like I said in the purity culture episode, I only just recently learned that purity culture was a thing. Because when I first heard, I think it was probably you talking about it. And I was just like, well, purity is a good thing. Culture is a good thing. What is I don't know
what's wrong with this.
And
it can't be a bad thing.
Yeah, okay. But now I understand it's referring to like a certain ideology, like we talked about. Yeah. But no, when I realized the effect, I never really got the whole like, men against women, or like need to satisfy the man's needs, like that type of thing. I got a heavy dose of, we just don't have sex till we're married. Yeah. Like we just don't, and never got the full explanation of why, or like the goodness of sex or the goodness of my body. It just wasn't discussed. And then it was like marriage. No, I'm not saying these things were all said directly. It's just, this was the message that was delivered. It's just like marriage is this finish line. So you get married, and then you're free. Go. Just go, do it. Whatever. There was no like, I understood that chastity is good, but I never understood it as a virtue that you grow in, that you can always, it was just chastity was, you don't have sex until you're married. Yeah. And like, I heard that you should be chaste in your marriage, but I had no idea what it meant. It was just like, just be chaste in your marriage. What does that mean? So like, there was none of this, it was nothing of like growing in love, and again, like virtue, and like, not that I didn't know marriage took work, but it was just, you are married so you can have sex. No, there is that love first. There's like seeing the other person, growing in intimacy in all these other ways. It's just, there was so much more than that. And so, to me, it was just this thing you don't do. And so I internalized that really in a big way. And when we got married, our wedding night, it was just like, I think like a lot of probably Christians or Catholics experience, it was just like, not, what?
How do you flip that switch?
How do you flip that switch? Yeah. And I haven't shared this yet, but I was not too long ago diagnosed with vaginismus. And, I think that what I'm learning is that there can be, like Emily explained, a lot of, a few different things that can cause that. And there is a spectrum of vaginismus. It's what my pelvic floor physical therapist explained to me recently is that like some people just have this mental component where it's just a matter of relaxing the pelvic floor, but there's also those superficial tissues that can be tight or cannot be tight. So like when we're talking about painful intercourse, by the way, I never mentioned that, there's a spectrum, and there's different things that can cause it. And I just happen to have I have all of those factors. Like I had severe endometriosis, severe cramps, this effective purity culture. And it probably is a combination of areas, but this is a real life example of how this can really affect women. And it has greatly affected my life, without going into too much detail now, because that needs its own episode. But let me just tell you, this is no small thing to deal with. So we have to get this right. We have to do this better for our daughters and for marriages.
and
our
sons.
sons. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
To teach our sons like to, be lovers.
Yeah.
And, I think part of this is a generational thing as well. I think, yes, definitely purity culture. I think it's also generational. Like we just didn't, it's not that I didn't see my parents love each other. It's just like they weren't like super affectionate, It wasn't, I mean, like, they would give each other a kiss when they came home, when my dad came home, and a hug and all that type of stuff. But like, beyond that, there was not, I don't know, there was a greater degree of privacy. And I think we're starting to see this shift with our generation. And, if you think it's good or bad, hold on to your opinion. But I think we're starting to see the shift that in order to help our kids understand the goodness of their bodies, the goodness of marriage, the goodness of sex, we have to model that. Now, obviously, like, we don't want them walking in when we're having sex, but like, right. That's not what I'm about to say. But showing that affection outside the bedroom, showing that, you enjoy each other's company, showing, teaching your kids appropriate anatomical terminology, teaching your kids bodily autonomy, teaching your kids the goodness from a young age. My 5-year-old daughter, she's so funny. She started to confuse the word peanut and penis. And so every now and then she'll ask me to make her a penis butter sandwich.
Oh my gosh. How do you not just crack up laughing at that?
I crack
absolutely
up.
Do.
It's hysterical. And I remember having a conversation with her one day where she decided that, her little brother, Thomas, he has a vagina, and she goes, and I have a penis, and mommy, you have a vagina, and daddy has a penis. And I was like, yeah, 2 out of 4. I mean, she was just being silly and just, no concept of what exactly she's saying, but she's understanding that there are like differences and all this type of stuff, and it's not treated as this taboo subject. And but at the same time, we teach privacy, like, we're trying to like whenever I come upstairs to take a shower, I make sure to lock my bedroom door, and my son freaks out because mom's disappeared.
Right.
But I'm like, I need my privacy. I'm going to take a shower. I need my privacy. So that, walking that balance between these are your parts and they're good, and then showing them and modeling them, like, when I go take a shower, I have my privacy. And we try to also cultivate privacy for our kids. And like, for example, we've had, like, when we had my parents or, either set of their grandparents in town, like, I don't let them wander around the house naked after a bath. Not because I'm worried about my parents or my husband's parents doing anything,
right.
But it's that knowledge that sexual abuse is most likely to happen with somebody that you trust, because you're likely to leave your kid alone with them. And so it's more about teaching my kids, we don't go running around naked, around anybody.
Yeah.
And then that, those types of things. And that's something that I think, you really miss in a lot of the purity culture conversations, for sure, because these are treated as taboo things, like you experience. You don't talk about sex. We just don't talk about it. It's just bad until marriage, and then it's good. Why?
Right.
Why? What suddenly made it good? A ring? Okay.
Right.
Got one of those in my engagement. Why is that not okay?
Right.
I mean, so give me something a little bit more concrete than that. And I think the message that we had, that pretty much everybody in our generation had, and this is just kind of how it was done, it was a negative message. It was not a positive message. It was, don't do this, but we're not going to tell you why, because we don't want you to be curious, because then you're going to do it. Whereas now we're realizing, no, if we give this positive message, your body is good, sex is good, your fertility is good, right? If we start to give these positive messages, then that actually gives people the ability to make better decisions. And whereas the negative message means that you're acting most of the time out of fear, the positive message gives you the opportunity to act out of love, to develop a healthy, authentic love of yourself. And then to also expect that from other people. I think that when we don't love ourselves well, we don't expect to be loved by others well. And so, yes, that does affect who we choose to have relationships with and so on. And it has that trickle down effect.
And that was entirely absent for me. I think that was a big thing. I think a lot of parents, they're just so scared their kids are going to have sex. They put that fear into their child, and it translates in really unhealthy ways. So I was only, and they're like, so don't have sex before you're married. This was the impression I got. And not a lot of conversation. I didn't see the struggle. Like, I didn't see my parents struggle. They didn't talk about how they struggle with different things or struggled with NFP, or like, it was just like, they were never tempted. Like, it was just, we just did this and it was good. And then, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting what was the other thing. The conversation wasn't open. So I did not have the freedom to ask questions when I struggled with sin. I didn't, it wasn't sex itself, but they didn't have conversations with me about the other stuff. And so I knew that this stuff was wrong, but in my brain, there was just this disconnect. So like, I struggled with the other stuff, but there wasn't the safety and the freedom to talk about that, because there was that shame and judgment around it. Well, I was human. I just didn't have the tools. So there was a lot of shame that I had on myself that caused other problems. So, and I really love what you're talking about, healthy physical affection. Like, we need that to be modeled for us. We need to model healthy, normal physical affection in a loving relationship, a marriage, for our children. And I think something else that tends to be missed is, well, I think it could go either way, but just delighting in our daughters and telling them they're beautiful. And that goes a long way. You don't want them to be the first time they're hearing this from the guys that they're going to meet in school. They need to be so full of like, oh, my parents delight in me so much as a little girl. Like, it's not going to be a big deal when they hear it. That was a big thing for me. I have wonderful parents that I love very much. They did a good job with the information that they had. I'm not trying to, say anything else, but it's just, we can learn a lot from the things that we recognize as we grow up, and that's a good thing.
I think every generation, we're learning more, and so we're able to do more because we have more information, we have more cards in our deck. This is, I think purity culture was, as when we talked about this, and contraceptive mentality as well. Providentialism. It's providentialism. Contraceptive mentality is it's the accusation they hurl. Providentialism is the ideology. But they're all pendulum swings, right? So purity culture is this pendulum swing away from hedonism. So it's, sex is everywhere, so we need to protect our kids and safeguard our kids. So in our home, sex will be nowhere. It's like, no. Actually, the antidote to hedonism that you see in the secular culture that you're rebelling against is to model healthy sexuality, to, like everything that we're talking, to give the positive message, to teach your body is good. That's actually the antidote. So it's this pendulum swing away, and you commit like you see the same problems on both ends of the spectrum. And again, the truth is in the middle. And then with providentialism, they're reacting to the prevalence of contraception. And it really bothers them that, people get into marriage and they're like, we don't want to have kids and all this type of stuff. So they pendulum swing to the other side and say, well, unless you're trying to have children all the time, you're sinning. It's like, well, no, the truth is in the middle, that there are valid reasons to avoid a pregnancy. And, there is not an absolute list of what are and what aren't the right reasons to do so, that ultimately, going back to what you've been talking about individuality and uniqueness, that every single married couple is going to respond to how they steward their vineyard in a unique way. Right. And that's what when I think about discernment, I like to think about stewardship, that we have, that our marriage, that our life, there's this, I hate kind of using this phrase, but a sphere of influence. There's an area around which we are given, not mastery. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh, my pregnancy brain. We have a certain area that is within our responsibility to take care of. Those are not the words I'm looking for, but they will have to suffice. Anyway, that's what we're talking about. So you have, this contraceptive idea where, children are the enemy, but then you have this other idea where it's like, unless you're having children, you're bad. It's like, well, no, neither one of those things are true.
It's fear on both ends of the spectrum.
Yes, on both ends. And and this is what we were talking about in the past couple of episodes, and I guess we're kind of teasing it out a little bit more now, is that when you have these types of approaches, you are making it ultimately impossible to love.
Because it's not a choice. It's not a choice somebody else is making for you.
It's fear-based. It's, God's creation, which is me, is bad, and I need to, apologize for it. Instead of this positive message, right? Going back to the very beginning, from like Jesus loved from the beginning, it was not so. So going back to how was it in the beginning? Bodies were good. Sexuality was good. Having children was good. But I've always noticed Adam and Eve didn't have kids until after the fall. Just saying. And I think they only had 3. If I recall correctly, I only recall 3 children. And like, they lived to like what, 900? Adam died at like 900. And he had 3 kids. Like, that's a providential problem right there.
Yeah, right there.
Like, he was not holy. He was not well, I mean, it's Adam. He was the first guy to really screw the pooch. But anyway, I had to drop a joke in here somewhere.
Of course.
I'm curious. Anyway,
we didn't get enough. Yeah,
I know. But yeah, contraceptive mentality, or providentialism, you and I haven't really had personal experience with how that ideology has shaped our life. Actually, yes, we have. What am I thinking? You have. The idea that in order to be Catholic, a good Catholic married person, you have babies.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it impacted me in a huge way.
Yeah.
That really flew under the radar. That's why, like, again, we use these extreme examples, but one of the reasons I want to have this conversation, at least, is that a lot of it is not obvious so much. And so just to check ourselves, what's the language that we use? I mean, it always comes down to the 2 primary purposes: unity and procreation. And procreation is more than just having babies, being fruitful, right. So really understanding those 2 things, that's the easiest check yourself, I think.
Yeah. And that's, I know in our conversations talking about this, everybody's like, well, you can't really lump infertility into this because it's not really like we've heard, you and I have both heard when this conversation comes up that, infertility is like, oh, well, that's not part of this conversation. Like, of course, it's like, actually, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Because 1 in 8 women deal with infertility. And,
and children can't be the best fruitful thing for one couple and not for another one. Like, you're either making it a primary purpose for everybody or nobody. Right. It's not
right. Because what happens is that if procreation, if children are the sole primary purpose of marriage, this is the whole point, then you could argue that infertility would be grounds for annulment.
Yeah.
And it's not, because children do not validate a marriage.
And I don't see these same people talking about spiritual motherhood and being fruitful and loving your children well and raising your children well. That's the issue. Another issue for me is that it's just like, just have the babies. Don't worry about how healthy they are. Don't worry about, how healthy your marriage is, how mentally healthy you are.
Yeah.
It's without those things.
It's this idea that if you have all the babies, everything else will fall in line. And it's like, no.
It's not real life. It's not real life.
No, that's not how it works. That's the providentialist, that if you have all the babies, God will provide. And my kickback to that is just always, God doesn't fix stupid. Which is not a very kind thing to say.
One way to put it, I guess. Yeah.
But it just, if you are going to willfully not use your gift of reason, God's like, well, I'm not going to force you.
It's uncomfortable in the middle place. It's uncomfortable in the balance. Like, it's uncomfortable to sit down with your kids and have a full conversation with them about what they just saw on TV, rather than just changing the channel really quick and moving on. Be like, you didn't see that. You didn't see that. Go to the other room.
Right.
It's hard. And I know that because I have a 6-year-old daughter now. And like, we're starting to have some conversations because she hears people talking at school or at camp, and like, but this is hard. It's hard to sit in the place of discernment and really be uncomfortable. But that's what this requires, this discomfort.
Yep.
In that discernment place, like, especially if, again, is this idea to have a child, is it out of selflessness, or is it out of selfishness, or is it out of ignorance?
Yeah, exactly.
So sit with that.
And I think that's really, if I'm going to be diagnosing the issue here, I think that's really what is at the core of why purity culture and providentialism are so appealing, is because you don't have to sit with the discomfort.
Absolutely.
You can, the world is black and white. It's absolute. There's no gray. There is an absolute right and wrong. There is an absolute right and wrong, but there is also gray. There is also gray area. And yes, sitting in the gray area is not comfortable, but it's real life. It's the world we live in. And that's part of what we have to do. I'm trying to think of like a story from, if anybody has seen The Chosen. I put off watching it for so long, and my husband and I finally watched it during Lent, and I pretty much because it portrays Jesus in such a way that he does encounter the mess. He sticks his nose right in the middle of it, and he was Jewish, so that was a nose. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I had to say it. I have Jewish ancestry, so it's fine.
Do I. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I have. Yeah, there's a little bit of German, and yes, it's on my dad's side, and they all do have larger noses.
I'm a Guggenheimer, so
Guggenheimer. Oh yeah, that's very German.
Yeah.
Yeah. For those who do not know the geographic history of Louisiana, Mary and I are both from Louisiana. And so it's like, wait a minute, Germans in Louisiana? What is this? So if you look at a map of Louisiana, the toe of the boot of Louisiana, called the Florida parishes, used to be part of the Spanish colony of Florida, except they didn't settle that far west. And so at some point, there was a bunch of German and English settlers who were just like, this place looks good. We're going to settle down. The Spanish aren't here. The French aren't here. It's on the river, whatever. So yeah, that's why there actually is
I did not know
large.
that. And it was my great grandfather who came over from Germany. So I'm not that far removed.
Yeah, same here.
Huh.
Yep.
Look at that.
Look at that.
Interesting tangent there.
So that's the geographic history of Louisiana.
But you were making this excellent point of how The Chosen, how beautifully The Chosen portrays Jesus. Like, he really does, I agree. It's the first depiction of Jesus that he actually seems like a real person that I really connect with, that I can picture. This is actually how I can see Jesus being.
Raise your hands, everybody who's listening, who now, whenever you say your prayers, you imagine, I forget his name, but the guy who portrays Jesus in The Chosen.
Oh, that's funny.
Like, that's who you imagine is Jesus now, which is fine. Like, we have all these different artistic depictions of Jesus, and like, he's an actor, like movies, like shows are art forms, you know, whatever. I think it's fine. I've heard some people be like, I feel really uncomfortable. I'm like, why? Because he moves. Anyway, but no, I think we can start to wrap up, put a little bow on everything. We certainly understand where these ideologies come from, right? But ultimately, we have to be honest about the fact that they're not true. And the reason why we know that they're not true is because we look at their fruit, right? They will be known by their fruit. Okay, let's look at the fruit of purity culture. Let's look at the fruit of providentialism.
That's good.
And what do we see? Do we see a flourishing? Do we see? No, we don't.
We see fear.
We see fear. We see the human spirit being crushed. We see people being limited. We see God being limited. And I know a lot of providentialists are like, excuse me, NFP.
How ironic.
I know.
We see people
unloved. Right. And that's, with both purity culture and providentialism, that is the most common thing that I see, is that there is this fear of the world. There is this fear of, I don't want my children to get caught up in X, Y, and Z, which on the one hand is a very good, like, you're their parent. You're supposed to keep them safe. That's your job. That's one of your jobs. But that safety can't come at the expense of their flourishing and their curiosity and the knowledge of their own goodness. Irrespective of whatever happens to them or whatever happens around them, that no matter what, our kids are good. And I think that's what we're missing. I understand that that's what is being strived for, but it's just not hitting the mark. It's not doing it, and this is why, I said early in one of the episodes, and I feel like I didn't really justify it very well, that, these ideologies lead to use and abuse. And ultimately, it's because they are formed out of fear. There's an us and them to these ideologies. And when you create that, you're creating a division. Now, yes, okay, there's a division. Christ is like, I came to divide or whatever. I came to separate the sheep from the goats. I get it. But that's Jesus's job. That's not ours. I ain't separating sheep and goats. They stink. And it doesn't mean that we can't have discernment in what we expose our children to and when and why and all these types of things, but just the motivation cannot be fear. It can't be fear. It can't be negative. It has to be positive. It can't just be, don't do this. It has to also be, do this.
Mm-hmm.
Be this, right? That our existence is more than just thou shalt not. Jesus came and he gave us the Beatitudes, right? Like, the commandments was a bunch of thou shalt not, but Jesus came and he said, do this, do that, do this, do that, do this, right? We don't have a negative faith. Yes, don't sin, but how do you not sin? Focus on virtue, right? You don't focus on the sin because, if you hyper focus on something, like, that's going to be what you do. But if you focus on the opposite virtue and trying to grow in that, that's how you get rid of the sin, right?
And don't be afraid to sit with the discomfort. I mean, growth and virtue, that's hard. That's uncomfortable to take that time, have the hard conversations, to sit with yourself and really discern what is motivating my heart right now. That's uncomfortable.
And I'll just tell you that Mary and I have both, over the past, year, been doing a lot of our own
Oh yeah.
personal sitting with very uncomfortable things,
Yeah.
uncovering very, very uncomfortable things. So we don't prescribe this from a place of like, yeah, you do it. This is what you got to do. It's like, no, 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 no. Do it. And also, we know it sucks
Mhm.
and it takes time. And it takes time. And I know whenever we're talking about moral stuff, people think like, oh, I have to be absolutely perfect tomorrow. No, you don't. You're not going to be. You know why? Because it took you however many years of your life to be the screw up that you are today. It's going to take you a few days or months or years, probably years, to grow in virtue. And I guess, it kind of feels like an odd place, but maybe a good place to leave this, for anybody who has read, oh crud, now I'm not going to remember if it's Searching for and Maintaining Peace or Interior Freedom by Father Jacques Philippe. I'm
You can
just
drop it in the show notes later.
we can drop it in the show notes, or I can just drop those two titles and make you read them both and find it.
Snaky.
Oh darn. But it always used to bother me when Jesus said, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. That is like the one thing that I was just like, okay, Jesus, no. Look, I know that with you, I can do anything, but being perfect like you is literally the one thing I can't do. No matter what, even with your help,
Right.
I will still be a sinner.
Right.
So what the heck am I supposed to do with this? That always bothered me. And Father Jacques Philippe, he had the best way of explaining it. He says, but who is the most perfect in scripture? It's the one who loves. And I was like, oh, okay, now that I can do. It's
Amen.
like that. I mean, that's something that I absolutely struggle with, but that gives me something that I can actually work on. That's not just utterly hopeless. It's growing in love. And when I say love, I mean authentic love. Like we were talking about with Christina, but willing, and when she quoted Thomas Aquinas, and willing the good of the other, and also willing the good of myself.
That's what I was going to say.
Right?
Don't forget to love yourself.
Right. And
the way you're designed.
Right. And you can't separate those loves.
Yeah.
You can't separate love of God, love of neighbor, love of self without making yourself a liar. If I hate any one of those, I can't love the other ones. If I hate myself, I can't love my neighbor. I can't love God. How can I love God? I hate something he loves. Right?
Right.
How can I love my neighbor? Because I don't even know how to love myself. I'm carrying my own woundedness over my lack of being able to love myself. So how am I supposed to love my neighbor? Right? And so all those things have to coexist. But yeah, so be perfect. But the perfection you're seeking is love. It's not like literal perfection. It's not never making a mistake. It's not never doing anything wrong. It's not, trying to do the right thing and swinging the pendulum for the right reason, but still having a devastating outcome. Like that's a mistake you can come back from.
Yeah. Say you do swing the pendulum one way or the other.
Yeah.
So choose something different tomorrow.
Yeah. Like we're not, that's ultimately with providentialism and purity culture, they're ultimately, and to me, when I the more I dig into them, I'm like, ultimately they're hopeless ideologies. There's no hope of change. It's just, this is what is, and this is how you have to go. It's absolute, it's finite. And I'm like, that's just not what we were made for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect way to tie a pretty bow on this. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Awesome.
And like Emily said, we are absolutely challenged by everything that we're saying. Just like we're sending challenges out there, we're being challenged by all of these things as well. So we're so grateful y'all are here. Please do us a favor and scroll down on the app that you're listening to and give us a review, leave us a rating. That would mean so much to us. You can find us on social media, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Our website is fanbase.org, FABMBASE.org. If you're not subscribed to our email list yet, go ahead and drop your email address in the pop-up on our website and tell your friends about our organization and this podcast if it's been meaningful to you. Again, as always, Emily and I are so grateful for you. Thank you for being here, and we can't wait to be back with you again with a fresh new spicy episode about something else. Y'all take care.